Good morning if you're in the UK, and good evening if you're in Australia, and thank you very much for joining us for the third in our series of online events which are looking at cybersecurity in space. My name is Tim Pinchin and I'm Head of Communications at the Satellite Applications Catapult, and we are really pleased to be running these workshops in partnership with the British High Commission to Australia. For those of you who don't know anything about the Satellite Applications Catapult, we are an independent research and technology organisation from the UK, and we're here to support the growth of the UK space sector by carrying out our mission, which is to innovate for a better world empowered by satellites. So I don't want to say very much more this morning, except please let me encourage you to use the chat and question and answer screens on the webinar to ask questions of our speakers, because it's a wonderful opportunity to find out more about what is going on with our speakers at the moment, and just to collaborate and to really fully engage in the sessions. And then I will also mention we are migrating from here to an online networking platform after this event this morning. We will tell you more about that at the end and make sure that you've got the link and that you can get across successfully, but a really good opportunity to meet our speakers for today and other days, and also representatives from the British High Commission and from the Satellite Applications Catapult. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce again David Livingstone, who will be facilitating our session this morning. David's a former naval officer and was a founder member of the Cabinet Committee on Information Warfare, which is a predecessor of the current government cybersecurity arrangements. And he is now an independent consultant and director of Napier Meridian. So without further ado, I shall hand over to David to facilitate the session this morning. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much indeed, Tim. And yeah, this is the third of our seminars, after which there will be that networking session, which I think will be very valuable. If we just sort of sum up where the pathway that we followed over the last couple of days. The first day we sort of kind of set out the stall and looked at some of the the challenges that the space and cybersecurity nexus was presenting us. We looked at some of the challenges, and then yesterday we tried to unearth a little bit more about where the responsibilities for developing a response to the cybersecurity and space challenge lay. Particularly, how we develop an all-informed network of interested parties, and then, how this might work, in amongst sort of kind of industry and government and so on. But today we're going to have a look at what governments can do to accelerate joint capacity building, and perhaps, our speakers could examine some of the areas that we might be able to capitalize on, such as the forthcoming free trade agreement, the space bridge arrangements, and maybe other multilateral mechanisms which we might have available to us. I'd like to introduce Daniel O'Toole, please, and Senior Advisor, Space Industry at Austrade. And in addition to his role at Austrade, Daniel has worked as a partial secondee at the Australian Space Agency since 2018. In this capacity, he works on joint Austrade Space Agency initiatives that help promote the growth of the Australian space industry through international market opportunities, programs, and so on. And there can be no better voice from the Australian government than Dan. And good morning, good evening, Dan. The floor is yours.
Thank you, David, and yeah, thank you to all of you for having me here for this this great series. It's really a very timely topic to be discussing with all of you. So for my session, as you correctly noted, my full-time position is with the Australian Trade Investment Commission, but I also work with the Space Agency's engagement team. So this is largely going to focus on the Space Agency's activities and the Australian government's overall commitments to the space sector. So I'll just share my screen. There we go. So the first thing we like to emphasize about the space sector in Australia is that it is really about more than just satellites and rockets. And this is something that's been emphasized in I think the setting the scene is that space is really an enabling infrastructure for our everyday lives. So, we rely on it for GPS navigation, for emergency services, online banking, a whole range of things. And the technologies that satellites provide also help improve productivity for a lot of critical primary industries, from agribusiness to mining and other sectors like that. And as a sector as a whole, this creates a kind of a strong upstream and downstream effect where you promote the development of very strong capabilities that are advanced technologies at advanced tertiary industries that then enable knock-on effects down the chain. So pre-COVID, the global space sector was estimated to be about $350 billion US. That's expected to increase to about 1.1 trillion by 2040. Some estimates have it a little bit further. But fundamentally, recognizing this and the increasing importance of space, the Australian government set a goal to triple the size of our space industry from the 2017 estimate of about $4 billion to $12 billion and add about an additional 20,000 jobs. So I'll just jump to the next slide. So the organisation charged with doing that is the Australian Space Agency, which was set up in 2018. The Space Agency is the primary organ within the Australian government to coordinate space activities and negotiate international agreements and support the sector. So its purpose, the purpose of the agency is to grow a globally respected space industry that lifts the broader economy, inspires, improves the lives of Australians, and build those international engagement arrangements. And in support of that, it has developed a civil space strategy that it released last year, which outlines its pillars of focus, which are broadly these international agreements, the desire to develop domestic capabilities across the nation, to regulate space safely and responsibly. The Australian Space Agency is also the regulator. It's the agency responsible for providing facilities licenses for spaceports and also launch licenses, and also to inspire the next generation, recognizing that we need a pipeline of talent, of inspired people to be coming through looking to solve the next set of problems. And in support of that, it outlined 7 civil space priority areas that are key focuses for the agency and the country as a whole. Won't go into too much depth into these, just given we've only got about 10 minutes, but broadly, all 7 of these are areas that enable the services and productivity gains of industries across Australia, from your everyday life to service sector to these primary industries we just mentioned, but also capitalize on Australia's unique strengths geographically and technologically and things like that. So things like communications technologies and services. We have this legacy with NASA and also more recently with the European Space Agency, with the Deep Space Communications Complex at Tidbinbilla and the ESA aligned Square Kilometre Array in Western Australia. But critically, in support of the sector, there are a number of planks of investment that are aimed at building capability. And a lot of this is focused around finding the right partnerships. So the Space Agency itself got $223 million. We were the government gave Geoscience Australia about $325 million to develop position navigation and timing and Earth observation platforms. CSIRO were giving $26 million for more space research. There was an industry and academic organization called the SmartSat CRC, which is a bit akin to the Satellite Applications Catapult in Australia. That got $55 million of government funding. And of course, importantly, the defence sector got $7 billion as part of its recently announced force structure review. So I'll delve into a little bit of these in a bit more detail. So just moving on. So the Australian Space Agency itself, the funding that it dishes out is kind of largely split into a number of different buckets. It's around enabling infrastructure, grants, and then government-to-government activities and projects that we can use to develop know-how and also build partnerships with countries that have longer space heritage. So I'll go into a bit of details, but briefly, these are the International Space Investment Initiative, the Space Infrastructure Fund, and the Moon to Mars Partnership. So the Space Infrastructure Fund is a $19.5 million fund, which is looking to develop key capabilities across the country. So this is there's 7 projects across Australia. There's 3 currently in development, and these are aligned with these 7 civil space priorities I mentioned. So you've got a mission control centre in Adelaide that'll be based at the same complex as the Australian Space Agency is. And that'll provide a platform for SMEs and researchers to control small sat missions from Australian soil, but also give people an opportunity to sit in and watch these. There's a space data analysis facility. The Pawsey Supercomputing Centre in WA is establishing a deep space data analysis facility that's looking to improve analysis capabilities for Australia across Earth observation space missions and space situational awareness, again tying in with those 7 space priorities. And then there's a robotics automation and AI command and control centre, or known SPARC for short. And Fugro Australia and Marine are establishing that to leverage the remote operations and automation technologies that the mining sector in Australia have, and we think can be leveraged for the benefit of the sector. Moving on, there's the International Space Investments Initiative, and this is a grants program largely targeted towards companies who are doing partnerships or international collaborations to develop unique solutions to space problems. The first round of these have already been awarded. A couple of projects that are noteworthy is next generation spacesuits. So you've got Human Aerospace and RMIT are developing a spacesuit that simulates gravity, and given the impact of low gravity environments on human health, this is something that is envisaged to help enable longer space flight. The Spirit CubeSat mission is a joint mission between the University of Melbourne, Cital Australia, Innovore Technologies, Nerman Space and Nerman Systems. So some of you may be aware of those, but they're going to be testing a range of technologies, propulsions, technologies, robust CubeSat busts, and a range of things, and that'll seek to demonstrate Australian capability along a number of key competencies. And then finally, Industrial Sciences is developing a collision avoidance tool to basically help with satellite collisions and space traffic management work. So Australia sees itself as having a significant role to play in space situational awareness, given our geographical location, a little bit like the communications piece, covering 6 of the Earth's rotation. We are well positioned to be both a key site for infrastructure that supports space situational awareness, but also technologies that help make that possible more efficiently. So there's a few companies in Australia that are developing those capabilities. Moving on, you've got the next major project is the Moon to Mars initiative. So this is the biggest bucket of funding that the Australian Space Agency itself has, and it's a $150 million program aimed at providing the Australian space industry really with an opportunity to partner with NASA and other partner countries on a major international space program. And this is over 5 years, split into 3 buckets. So it's supply chain facilitation work. It's helping Australian companies work with those partners more closely and become part of the supply chains, but also demonstrating their capability, getting those companies flight tested, raising their material levels, and then finally a trailblazer program that will kind of be like a consortia of Australian capability all coming together for one key mission that'll demonstrate something unique that only we can do and contribute. The next major and the largest piece of funding for space is in the defence space. So the 2024 structure plan, which was released earlier in the year, outlined a range of priority areas. Space itself, it was given $7 billion, and the cyber and information space was given $15 billion up until 2030 to address key gaps and capability needs within Australia's space and cyber infrastructure. So this money is separate but complementary. There's more to the enhanced cyber plan, that $15 billion piece. I'm only focusing on one plank because this is a cross-cutting section of it. But broadly speaking, space services, the investment is going to focus on upgrades for PNT in contested environments. Again, this is an area of critical vulnerability that most governments have highlighted. Space control investment to build our space domain awareness and work with key partners that will enable that, like the United States, the United Kingdom, and others. The cross-cutting element from a cyberspace standpoint is the enhanced cyber security defenses. So this plank of the force structure plan is focused on strengthening the intelligence capability and cyber capabilities of the Australian Signals Directorate, particularly to protect government agencies, critical infrastructure, and so on. Importantly, that enhanced cybersecurity defences list, it does spell out in a separate cybersecurity strategy that space-based infrastructure are among those targeted for funding and for increased resilience and support. So moving on, I thought I'd focus a little on some of the existing ties with the United Kingdom and Australia, and we do have a few emerging activities and current activities that are worth taking note of. So a lot of you would probably be aware of the Novasar 1 project. Australia, through the CSIRO and Geoscience Australia, have partnered with the UK to develop a number of applications under that project. And Earth observation, data analytics, and remote sensing projects more broadly are areas of collaboration that we're pursuing. UK Space Agency has also been in contact with the New South Wales government regarding the Western Sydney Aerotropolis and roles it may have in the planned Western Sydney Advanced Manufacturing Research Facility. There are also a number of growing private sector engagements as well. So some of you may have seen that Goonhilly Earth Station signed a statement of strategic intent with the Australian Space Agency previously. They're also a partner of the SmartSat CRC, and they have already established an operation in Australia. In addition to that, you've got groups like Black Sky and Raptor Aerospace partnering on joint projects around propulsion technologies. And then finally, there's sort of global governance and multilateral collaboration. So space being fundamentally a multilateral and a cooperative arena. Australia and the United Kingdom already work together through the UN Committee for Peaceful Use of Outer Space and its subcommittees and a range of other international forums. And so finally, just moving on to ways we can build further collaboration. There is a new initiative that my organisation, Austrade, and the Space Agency are working with its UK counterparts, the UK Space Agency and the Department for International Trade on. That is the UK and Australia Space Bridge. Some of you may have heard of this. So this, the Space Bridge was brought about in recognition of the complexity of the multifaceted nature of space. The regulatory environment of space is managed by multiple different authorities in most countries, because you've got signals and spectrum licensing groups that are critical for major space-based infrastructure. You've got your launch piece, you've got airspace considerations to manage, and then you've got dual-use technology. So the purpose of the bridge was to try and establish new cooperation mechanisms, increase trade investment, bring deeper engagement and alignment, and expand the economic opportunities between the two countries. And we held a number of workshops on both sides to kind of work out what people's key concerns were, and a lot of this was around this opacity of global governance issues and barriers to trade investment, and also just a lack of opportunities to work together. So it is split into 4 pillars. This governance piece to help us work together and strengthen the ties we already have around things like UN COPUOS. Regulations, this is largely focused around trade investment barriers, and then trade investment and business. That's a piece for the 2 trade investment promotion agencies, Austrade and DIT, where we effectively try and work with each other and the key industry bodies. So, nominally UK Space and the Space Industry Association of Australia and others to look for opportunities to provide interactions and matching between sectors. And then, of course, there's research and education, sort of recognizing that space is an area that's quite fertile ground for R&D, with a lot of challenges that still need to be overcome. And groups like the SmartSat CRC and Catapult both have strong networks in the university sector, and there are other groups with similar expertise and networks that we can play a role in helping to connect. So that's that was previously scheduled for earlier this year, but with COVID and everything, it got pushed back as a lot of things did. So we're currently aiming to have this concluded in the first sort of program of work to be done early in 2021. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dan, for that, for setting out the baseline from the Australian side, and of course I think the Catapult is very familiar with the Space Bridge concept. I do believe that it had a formative role in developing the concept, which is, I think quite rightly, is being a government framework. Is now being taken up by others. We might come back to Space Bridge and how we exploit that, which I think will be an important, how to expand it and to make sure that people know that this is a mechanism that may already exist. But I'm not going to preempt Kev McLoughlin from the UK Space Agency and who has joined us. And Kev, I think the floor is yours now. Thank you very much indeed. Hello, Kev. There we go.
Hi, good morning, David. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, that's perfect. Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. I've been having some cyber challenges with connecting to the webinar this morning, but hopefully we're now pretty much all there. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to spend a few minutes talking to you from the UK government perspective on cyber in space and how that all works. So I'm going to try, as previous speakers have, to share some screen stuff with you, and then we'll work from there. So hopefully you now are able to see my startup screen, David. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's going now. Could other presenters please go on to mute, please? We were picking up some background. Thanks so much. Kev, please go ahead. There we go. Kev, you've gone back to mute. Kev, if you could unmute, please. Technical challenges here. Kev, you're on mute. Can webinar host unmute Kev on his behalf? All right, we have some challenges. Just while we sort that out, one thought here, perhaps Daniel, while we we might explore this later in question time. Is we got government to government and we got sort of industry. Oh no, we've got Kev back. I think Kev, are you okay?
Yeah, I think so. So let's have another go at sharing that screen.
Right.
So what I'll probably have to do is leave it in a way that isn't on slideshow, I'm afraid, in order to manage both of my screens. Is that?
Yep. I think the important thing is to you know, use what we have, if we could, and you know, and then we'll certainly be able to pick up the points on that. Yes, there we go. Fantastic.
Okay, thank you. So my apologies for that. So I've been asked to speak to you all for a few minutes about the UK's stance on cyber security in space, where we think the sector is and where we think we ought to be going and what it is we're doing about it. So this few minutes is very much focused on that topic. And I think we'll start, and you, I know, have had a couple of days discussing where we are in terms of cybersecurity as a sector. And I think kind of the elephant in the room for many may be the perception that for many outside of the sector, space is viewed as very much behind the curve in terms of our cybersecurity processes, approaches. I think that's probably an unfair perception, and probably a perception born out of a lack of understanding of exactly where we've got to in the sector and what it is you're all capable of delivering. But it's there, and so it's something that I think we need to collectively be able to.
Right, Kev, I'm not receiving anything at the moment from you. Kev, are you still online? I can see your caption is still there. Okay, right. While we sort that out, Dan, for you, there is I think you picked up an important point here as you were going through your presentation, and not specifically government related, but there is a question of the role of the investment community, which is, I think, a point that you brought up very effectively there. We obviously, you know, building up capacity, you need money, and some of it will come from government just to get things going and creating these bilateral arrangements like the SmartSat CRC and developing the space bridge. Can you expand a little bit more on how we can harness the power of the investment community? You know, because that is a truly international market. That would be very useful. Thank you, Dan.
When you, as a point of clarification, when you say the investment community, you're talking largely sort of venture capital for emerging technologies, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and also how to build big infrastructure as well, where you need the big sort of pension funds and the and so on.
Two big challenges. I think on the first point, thinking about venture capital with space. Obviously, there's not a huge problem with it in the United States. There's a lot of space investment there, but in economies where like Australia, where the venture capital community is not quite as large, there is probably a bit of a barrier or a perceived barrier to space investment, because there are, particularly in the upstream side, longer lead times, and it's largely considered deep tech. But given that those lead times, if we can get more venture capital in these markets, it acts as a really critical circuit breaker for the development of those technologies. So we've seen that in Australia with consortia that have supported some of the emerging companies, groups like Gilmore Space Technologies, who are developing hybrid rocket technologies, you know, IoT companies like Myriota and Fleet Technologies and others. And so those are technologies that by themselves, you know, it's very hard to bootstrap. So being able to have domestic venture capital groups. So we have the Main Sequence Ventures here, which is an arm of the CSIRO, or related to the CSIRO rather, partnering with international venture capital groups and bringing those larger sums, so you can have a Series A in a market like Australia that might be otherwise quite difficult. So that's the sort of first point. Second, private equity and larger investors in infrastructure. That's probably a bit of a more of a challenging piece. The kind of way it works at the moment is really largely around trying to attract major global space primes to invest in a lot of these platforms, and then work out ways that you can, or create incentives to provide opportunities for local supply chain companies to develop their capacity and become part of something that would be difficult for them to do on their own. In terms of looking at ways that you can do that, in traditional infrastructure, you can look at project financing and public-private partnerships. The range of capabilities in space, there is obviously potential for private equity to get involved, but it requires a greater degree of organization, I think, across the whole range of levels of government and industry to pool resources and create business cases when it comes to particularly in orbit platforms and technologies. But if you could pull it together, there's huge potential.
Yeah, and just coming back to the space bridge, we've seen government to government, the 4 layers there. Is there capacity, or is there intended capacity in the future space bridge to link up financial markets? Is this a consideration that has come up on the agenda? Because I think it then provides the market confidence and the power to build up capacity, and may well reinforce the concept of an Australian to UK tying up of space capacity development.
So, I mean, the tying up of the financial markets it's probably a little beyond the scope of the space bridge as we see it. I suppose enmeshing of the ecosystems and cross-pollination of opportunities is probably would be our first step. Is trying to create an awareness within each respective financial community, I suppose, that might be looking to invest in maybe joined up and complementary capability. So I mean, it's a fairly big project to connect the two financial systems in that way, but it's certainly something I think you're right. The industries as a whole are looking for assistance with. So we'd start probably at a more fundamental step. Right.
Thanks very much. Still looking for. No, I don't think we have Kev yet. So I'm sorry to keep you on the podium there, Dan. But there another issue as well, particularly in the defence and security area. And of course we do have common defence and intelligence, mechanisms. Is the problem which I think I've come across before, which is common recognition of security clearances. And I understand that in Australia the processes are roughly the same, but it can take a long time. And if we're going to build up joint capacities, how do you see, which I think is a fundamental enabler, to get things going, and so you have a common a vetting policy, perhaps.
So I mean that is a problem from a workforce standpoint and a collaborative standpoint. And it is something that I can say the defence community are very cognizant of. We do have arrangements with a number of governments to transfer security clearances over. There, dual recognition is already in place in a number of places. But you're right. Getting a security clearance, it is a process. There's always a lengthy vetting period. But more broadly on that defence piece, one thing I should say is that the importance of dual use technology is something that the Space Bridge does seek to recognise. So we've got.
Yes, we do have Kev back, right? Right, I think, Kev, you're on phone in, but we're going to show you a slide. So if I can just ask you to canter on, please, at pace, and then just cover your major points, please.
Sure, thanks, David. So not quite sure where we got to before the gremlins got hold of us.
We had your opening slide, Kev.
So literally just the one with my name on.
That's it. And there we go. Right, here we go.
Okay, so if we go to slide 2, please. Essentially, this is something you've been talking about for the last couple of days. This is the backdrop in which we are operating. And the main points I think that I wanted to draw out here is that over the next decade or so, we know that both our capabilities will be improving dramatically, but so will those of our adversaries. And the breadth and depth of the threats that we face are increasing exponentially. I think that's a given. I think the other point I wanted to make is that the sector writ large does have something of a, or at least those outside the sector have a perception that perhaps space isn't quite as well prepared for cyber issues as some other sectors. I don't agree with that perception personally, but I do see that it is something that we need to overcome if we are to truly move forwards as a sector. So we've been doing a number of things in the agency with UK providers, and if we flick on to the next slide, please. To think about risk awareness, to think about training, to think about identifying our supply chain. So we are currently going through an exercise of mapping the whole supply chain for the UK sector, both internal and external providers, and thinking about the assurance of that supply chain. And really promoting and working hard on looking at cyber standards, good practice in the sector. We're doing that in a number of ways. So we have some dedicated activity going on in the agency to do the understand function, if you like, and to map out our sector, map out our businesses, and map out our capabilities from a government perspective that we wish to be able to employ, that are appropriately secure and capable to meet our needs. And then we're also undertaking a series of workshop events on cyber, working very closely with colleagues from our National Cybersecurity Centre here in the UK to really drive up and to demonstrate more the degree to which the sector is proficient, capable, and leading the charge in many ways on cyber security and cyber risks. Next slide, please. So in that way, we have done kind of two things. First of all, we are working proactively with the sector itself through a regular series of intelligence and information exchanges on the status of the cyber threat, but also, as I said, on workshops and training activities, and also on kind of highlighting the successes in the sector and the sector's ability and growing ability to adopt security measures, particularly as we in the UK at least look forward to launch facilities happening in the UK and being able to have a kind of end-to-end capability that provides us with build, launch, operate, and then decommission all the full gambit. So an awful lot more to take on board and to think about. But we're also looking at legislation, both internally in the UK, so some national legislation that you will have heard of, such as the Space Industry Act, came in 2018. We're working with a change in regulation for the agency, where the Civil Aviation Authority becomes the regulator for space, and will certainly be applying their capabilities into the space sector increasingly to underpin the kind of legislative and regulatory aspects of what it is we do, and to ensure that we kind of set appropriate standards. But we're also working, and you heard Daniel touch on this, in the UN through our Foreign, Commonwealth and Development colleagues, to look at how we might start to generate norms of behaviour in the operating environment. And what comes with that, although many of the facets and features of that discussion are not cyber, there are clearly cyber related aspects to what it is we want to see and do in the domain. Next slide, please. So on that point, there are a couple of kind of issues for debate, and maybe something that you could start to think about in the workshop at the end of this. And those are around quite how far do we go with that? What is the sweet spot? What is the balance between mandating activity, mandating standards in the sector, particularly in the realms of cybersecurity, versus supporting industry getting to its own set of standards that it would essentially be able to self-regulate on. And it's always difficult to get this balance right. We certainly are not in the game in the space agency of getting anywhere near a red tape tangle in this area. We want to make sure that the industry leads the discussion on this and pushes for what it believes it needs in order to be in a good place and demonstrate that we lead in the area of cybersecurity. But it may be that industry themselves believe that a degree of regulation, or certainly a degree of setting more common standards, both nationally and internationally, for many of the things that we do, might be the way forward. So very much a point for discussion at the moment, but also very much an area where we understand there are sensitivities, and there are clearly easy ways to get this wrong. So a very cautious approach to this, and I'd be interested in your views later on what that might look like. I think finally, next slide, please. So I think we're on a slide that that's titled Global Partners. We've touched already, or Daniel and David has touched already on the Space Bridge. There are a few things that are going on in the agency that are kind of wholly designed to encourage collaborative working. We already, as a sector, are exceptionally good at doing that, and we certainly do champion that engagement. Both the UK and Australia have many partners who are working very closely to get collaborative capabilities up and able. But in the UK, we also have a specific program of funding which is piloted this year, the National Space Innovation Programme, and there is an international element to that, which is specifically focused on funding collaborative projects between the UK and partners, including Australia. The first kind of stab at this is this year, and we're expecting imminently, if not already out of the door this morning, whilst I've been having cyber issues, internet issues, we're looking to announce the first winners of contracted work and activity from the international element of that fund, as I say, in the next few days. It focuses on science, trade, and particularly security for this audience, and we expect this program to build exponentially over the next few years. So certainly an area, an opportunity for UK prime, UK-led collaborative activity with other nations. And then, of course, the Space Bridge initiative, I think that's been discussed at length. What I would say is that in accord with Daniel's description, we're very much, I think, agency to agency focus is getting the framework agreement right in order to be able to demonstrate to both sectors in both countries exactly what this is, and it should be viewed as a tool. It should be viewed as a way to cut through much of that red tape that I was talking about earlier, and get to rapid collaborative working on a number of areas in space. Modelled, for those that are aware of it, on the FinTech Bridge that seems to be working exceptionally well. So final slide, please, slide 7. And I suppose this really is a question to the audience about what you believe we should be doing more than is currently the case. So from a cybersecurity perspective, sure, we've put together workshops, we've put together collaborations, we've put together some funding streams to assist with identifying and building on capability in this area, and we're looking at appropriate supportive legislation, regulation, or standards to demonstrate to the world, and we want to demonstrate to the world that we are leaders in cybersecurity in space, and are suppliers of space capabilities that you would wish to go to because they're trusted, they're assured, and they are secure. But what else can we do to assist the sector in the UK and in Australia to bring that to the kind of global attention of the global market? I'll stop there. I hope that's the same point.
Indeed, Kev. I do see we've got some questions coming in. Oh no, they've disappeared. Who's taken them away? Oh no, there we go. And this is to do with standards. A question has come in. What standards? And you know, cyber standards are important, and there is something about creating an international dialogue and having standards as a key driver in developing, you know, capacity. In the Space Bridge, particularly, or the dialogue around the Space Bridge, what standards are we looking at? And Kev, you may know more about this than Dan, because you're probably a little bit closer to the Space Bridge dialogue. But Dan, I'd like your opinion too. You know, what is the role of the standards, and how far have we got in developing those on an international basis? Maybe Dan, you can take over while Kev sort of winds down. But the importance of standards here.
Yeah, no, so I think standards, you know, are an area probably not so much for the space bridge itself, but just given the nature of them, it's the kind of thing that we've discussed with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade here to see what areas that they could discuss around the free trade agreement that would support the goals of the space bridge. I should note that last year they did actually sign a mutual, recognition agreement between the US and Australia around conformity standards. A lot of it's relating to things like wine and other goods, but it's also has a recognition of test report certifications and other things like that. But in terms of standards and areas that we're interested in, obviously spectrum licensing is something that both countries I think both countries are in the process of looking at, given the changing nature of space data. The increased activity in LEO activities is causing or has stimulated a review in the way we approach spectrum, particularly in Australia. So there are already ongoing communications between our chief authority, ACMA, and its UK equivalent. Our spectrum pricing rules are currently under review, so we're sort of still awaiting their final, I suppose, feedback on that. But that's certainly an area we'd be interested in discussing. And then obviously, it's not so much standards, but government-to-government agreements, things that'll allow us to collaborate on key technologies. Both countries are signatories to the Missile Technologies Control Regime. So theoretically, if we were to want to work together on anything around the sort of access to space piece, that's something we would need to address. But again, that's a treaty level discussion. We would need to bring in our relevant organs like DFAT and the Foreign Office.
Right, and very quickly, please, Kev. Your view on standards. Just a minute, because we're almost up to time now.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so Dan touched on a number of areas there, both spectrum, ITU issues, and where we are with MTCR and so on and so forth. For me, cybersecurity standards are some way from being adopted formally in a uniform way across member states and nations. And so each nation has a set of defined standards, or are defining and refining their own standards. For us, the National Cybersecurity Centre is the technical authority, and we are working very closely with them to encourage international colleagues to get to a common set of standards that the industry sectors can work to. I'll give you a quick example. PNT was touched on by Daniel as an area of concern across many nations, and we're doing an awful lot of work on PNT in the UK at the moment. And you will find that there are a plethora of standards out there. I mean, many hundreds of standards, but those that particularly apply to P or T in the UK or even in international bodies are very, very few and far between. So there is a standard for timing coordination for the finance sector. There is a standard for timing for communications networks, mobile communications networks, but very, very little else. So there are those types of things that are areas that we believe that we can collectively work on, particularly in the adoption of formally agreed shared cybersecurity standards and security standards writ large. Right. It goes to your conversation, David, earlier about commonality of clearance processes too. So it's those kinds of areas that we can improve. Over.
Thanks very much indeed, Kev. I'm afraid, there are some points coming in here. We're not going to have enough time to address them. We've got points about the UK National Space Innovation Programme. I think from the correspondents who haven't, we haven't answered, perhaps there's a mechanism, Tim, that we could be able to answer, particularly on, those UK specific points. So just before I hand over back to Steph Lysaght, who's to close out, I think there are three major points here. I think there's things about how we can use standards to provide a common approach to some of the more technical aspects of developing joint capacity. I think an area that we haven't yet fully explored is how we can link up our financial community to be able to take space capacity from our financial communities, our two exchanges, both here in London and also in Australia, how we can actually link them up to look at a through life financing from developing capacity all the way through to large scale programs. And I think there's also, very importantly, I think the potential behind the space bridge arrangements, which have been a little bit slower in coming to fruition, and how do we fully capitalize on that? And I think that creates a pathway, government-enabled pathway. That was the question for today, a government-enabled pathway in order to develop joint capacities and go and hit national and, of course, exploit international markets as well. And that's all from me. So I'm going to hand over to Steph Lysaght, please, who is the Consul General for Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania. Steph, the floor is yours.
Hi, apologies everybody, my computer's not working and it's on a handheld phone. So could I just say thank you to all of our panelists and everyone who's taken part over the last 3 days. I mean, I've taken three main messages from across the 3 nights. I mean, the first is that the democratization of space is a truly great thing. It's well underway and it's not going to be turned back, and it's going to present huge institutional opportunities for collaboration, as well as tremendous opportunities for companies to get involved and to really push things forward. I think the second thing for me was that we are a little bit behind, or certainly some people are a little bit behind on this in mitigating the cyber risks, and we've got to do more. But the third thing is that, and the good news is that there are ways and already knowledge that we have in order to get this right. There are a range of proportionate measures that people can take to protect their investments in space and to make sure that they thrive. That's both the case for new kit that goes into space, but also some ways of helping with kit that's been in space for a number of years. That's particularly the case, I think, between cooperation between the UK and Australia. We have a range of arrangements which put us in an excellent place to be able to push this forward. And as we've heard with the Space Bridge, and we've heard from Australian government colleagues, there's any number of people out there wanting to get involved and to help. Just one of them is the UK Department of Trade and Investment, and we've got a network of experts all across the world, but particularly here in Australia, that is really keen to hear from any British companies that's interested in investing in Australia or exporting to Australia, or indeed vice versa. So again, thank you for everyone taking part. I hope you'll be able to stay on and take part in some virtual networking. And I'll hand it back to Tim now, who's going to tell you how you can do that. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Steph. And thank you, everyone. Tim, over to you. We've struggled with the internet quite a lot this afternoon. So please explain how we're going to now connect people up. Thank you.
I will. Excellent. Thank you very much, David, and thank you for those closing words, Steph. That's it's been really great to have to be able to work together on this fantastic engagement between our two countries. Just to introduce Remo, so my colleague is just posting in the chat window now a link to an online networking session which is run through a platform called Remo. if you click on that session, you'll be directed to the platform, which is set up just for us, and it will sort of prompt you to just put in a little bit of information, so your name, your company name, and your job title. And I really encourage you to fill that in, please, because it means that when you're in the networking session, it's easy for people to see who you are, and to come and talk to you. It's like a virtual name badge if we were in a room together in Harwell or in London, or in Sydney or in Melbourne. And then you can make your way around the room and talk to people who are there. But the main thing here is to click on that link and leave and come into Remo, and we'll leave that link there for a couple of minutes. And I'll just give a brief talk about what Remo can do once you've joined us in Remo. Okay, so that link will be there now, and we'll end this webinar now, and we will see you again in just a moment.
So Tim, I think the link itself isn't complete.
Yeah, no, it does look slightly strange at the end, but it is the right link. Okay.
We okay there, Tim? Yep. Okay, let's go and find it.
So for all attendees still in the webinar, this webinar will be closing in approximately 4 minutes. If you can please follow the link to Remo, it is a complete link. It looks a bit funny, but it's complete. And you should then be able to join us on Remo to start networking. Thank you. This webinar room will be closing in 1 moment. We'll keep it live for another couple of minutes, just so that those remaining participants can grab the Zoom link, the Remo link there. And if you pop on over, join us, register, sign up, you'll be able to begin networking with our colleagues across Australia and here in the UK. We'll now be closing this webinar room. If any of the remaining 6 attendees are having difficulty getting onto Remo, do just put a message in the chat now. Otherwise, we'll be closing this down. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you over at Remo.